please.
So we will just uh what's the right word? We'll just trace through the trades from yesterday till today and see how we would have leveraged off those trades using my entry model, right? Uh, you guys know already there's nothing too extra. Okay, it's just just doing the basic things over and on. So the first thing you should try to do is understanding your higher time frame bias. Okay, that's the first thing. People see me use 1 minute and then just conclude that I don't do a top-down analysis. Okay, the first thing to do is to have your higher time frame bias and know what your higher time frame is doing. Know what your higher time frame range is. Okay, and then understand the concept of liquidity for what it actually is. Okay, now one thing you need to know is that price is not interested. Price is not interested in. Price is not interested in your trend line liquidity. This thing you could do and call it trend line liquidity. Price is not interested in that. Okay, if this is a trend line liquidity indeed, it means obviously there have been transfer of funds, right? There have been transfer of funds from all of those highs to the new highs. Okay, transfer of funds, transfer of funds, transfer of funds, right? As soon as we have clear transfer of funds, all of those highs become old highs to be rated. So when you mark all of this, is as good as just marking the single liquidity points that should be taken out. Okay, that's what price is after, the origin. Okay, so price is interested in coming up to the origin to grab liquidity before we see a proper shift. Okay, so clearing all of those transfer of funds, not necessarily taking them out as a trend line. That is why I don't mark the trend line liquidity thing. If not, obviously, okay, obviously you would have seen me do something like this. I hardly do that on my charts, okay, because they're irrelevant. The main target is the origin. Okay, that's where the whole move started from. So it becomes external liquidity to be taken out. Well, that's just on the side. So the first thing to do is to understand your price range, right? And then uh, know what you're working with. So this is a grab on liquidity. I explained this already from the daily and weekly time frame already. So I will not go through all of this story again today. Okay, so we had a nice grab on liquidity from this low, and then you must understand why price is grabbing liquidity. Okay, the idea is that we have buyers, we have our sellers rather sitting behind this low, waiting for a breakout, retest, and continuation. So we need to tap them in as well. That's why we need to properly break this zone and violate this low. Okay, before we see a nice shift in structure. Now, for those of you who have been following me for a while, you understand that I will always say the reason why I would not be waiting for a confirmation on this trade on the higher time frame. Let's say I'm waiting for a 4-hour confirmation. This is the 4-hour break of structure, right? Okay, and then I'm waiting for a 4-hour confirmation. So I need price to come back into this full range. Yeah, because this is the break of structure, something into this range to give me a continuation to the upside. That may happen in the next, if it happens, the next 3 weeks or 2 weeks or so have you, depending on the volume instead of price. Okay, why should I do that when I can actually leverage off the whole move instead of here? So the fact is that after we have grabbed liquidity, price should travel to the next point of interest. Okay, because this is the 4-hour time frame. So after grabbing liquidity from this low, all of this is a single range, right? So I've created a new low here. Where is my previous high? Where's my previous high with respect to this range? This is my previous range high, right? So this is my previous range high.
Yeah.
Right. So if price has grabbed liquidity from this low, it means that for some reasons it has to rally into at least the 50% of this range high, right? So my 4-hour range, I am setting that price needs to make a buy move into this area. Okay, so with that in mind, I have a range I'm working with. So I'm looking for more buy setups and I'm looking for corrective sell setups, right? So counter trend sells and pro trend buys. Okay, after bearing in mind what the 4-hour range is, some guys might want to go to the 1-hour time frame and then still try to draw their 1-hour range or all of that, but I don't do that personally. Okay, after marking the 1 hour range, I go the 4 hour range, I go to my 15 minutes. Okay, the 15 minutes gives me the range I will be willing to work with for a particular day, because it's impossible for price to fill in the whole of that range immediately on the, what's it called? Filling the whole of that range immediately in a single day. So you need to take series of days for that to happen. I don't know if you understand. Okay, so the 15 minutes gives me the range that I'm willing to play with for a particular day. Okay, and as at when I sent the setup, this was my high, right? 15 minutes range, this high to this low, right? And because of this grab of liquidity here and my shift of internal structure, it's already confirmed to me that this high is external liquidity and should be taken out. So I'm interested in the buy moves that occur inside of this and then come back into giving us our clear trend formation, right? So if I have this liquidity taken out, it means I need to have price retrace back into the 50%. Okay, so I'm trying to trace the story that led to me taking these trades the previous day. Okay, so price needs to come back in, then give me further correction before coming back in, and so on and so forth. Okay, hence, if this is a range from this low, right, to this high is my confirmed range I was willing to work with, right? So once price tapped below this 50% range, I was willing to begin to look for my buy setups. Okay, so after this now, dump to my 1 minute, because I think the essence of this session is to really understand the entries, right? So I would not do too much of top-down analysis. So you understand why I was willing to buy. Please mute your mic, Who is that person?
Yes, sir.
Please mute your mic. I just want Perez mic open for now. Okay, so you understand why I was willing to buy, begin to look for buys at this point, right? Because this was already discount. Price does not totally need to fall into a more discounted area once it has seen equilibrium. Anything from equilibrium is valid enough to cause price to move. Okay, so if you're selling in equilibrium already, you're already selling in weak zone. Okay, if you're selling in equilibrium already, you're already selling in weak zone. So anywhere from equilibrium, which is my midline, is great enough for price to begin to react from. And then I had this point of liquidity maxed out, though I expected this point as my extreme. Okay, because of some equal lows on the 1 minute. But then that's that. Let's just jump to the 1 minute time frame already. And then we'll trace all of that. Now, the three things you should bear in mind that I would look for any zone or to validate a strong swing point are basically a grab on liquidity and a break of structure, and then some structural inducements, minor inducements high inside of that range that I expect price to just come up to grab before running. Not necessarily the order block. Not necessarily the order block. Okay, so I want to see a grab on liquidity and a break of structure. Then my target entry is, I don't know what name to call it yet, but some level of inducement, internal inducement, that I'm looking for price to tap into before the retracement to the downside. Okay, the people who learned from various people, from RAIM, from all of that, may do that differently. Okay, but I know it still has to do with something close to this. Okay, so this is the whole story, right? And then we understand this was for today. Okay, let me go to yesterday. I was trying to explain the same thing I just said, that price does not need to, marking a trend line liquidity is irrelevant. I was trying to do that with a friend this morning. That's why I marked this. Okay, the main point of target was this high. So marking this out to call that trend line is just to draw too many lines on your screen. I only have horizontal lines on my screen. Okay, so yeah, so what's the story? Let's get it. Now, this was yesterday, right? The whole of this was Asia, so I would not go through that, though I had this area as my final target as the Asian high, equal highs on the Asian high, but not dealing with that now. I'm trying to talk about why I took those entries, right? Okay, so let's go over with it. Now, this was a grab on liquidity inside of Asia, right? And then price continued to shift structure, right? So this was a break of structure. Cool, right? Because we had this previous point of demand violated. Once this demand is violated, it automatically makes this a flip zone. Okay, but then at this point, I was not willing to trade from here. This was about 6:30 a.m. And then I'm only looking to trade in either Frankfurt Open, 7 o'clock mitigation or 8 o'clock mitigation, or whenever London decides to mitigate. But then I'm working within 7 a.m. for London. The mitigations inside of 7 a.m. to 11 a.m. are what I consider for London, right? Now, theoretically, this was my last point of buy before it was violated. And we had some sort of grab on liquidity and a break of this structural high. So regionally, externally, on this 1 minute time frame, this is an actual demand level, right? That was violated. Now, we cannot see the block or the zone that violated this here, but then there's some hidden basis on the 30 seconds or the 15 seconds and what have you. But what actually happened here was that price grabbed liquidity from above that high. If you look, I did not enter this trade here because I did not see any reasonable confidence I could work with since I could not see my second time frame. My trading view had expired already. So I'm just working with my 1 minute for a while. I think for like 2 days now. So price came, like I mentioned earlier, I am looking out for 3 things, okay? Grab on liquidity, break of structure, and some level of internal inducement high that price can come back to grab liquidity from, okay, before it drops. And this already fulfilled that criteria of grabbing liquidity from this inducement high. Okay, as small as people want to see full candle close or full bar close, whatever works for you, but this is what I use. Okay, so this is a grab on liquidity for me. So the next thing I'm looking forward to seeing is a break of structure after that grab on liquidity. Okay, so once this happened, my setup shifted to this area as grab on liquidity, right? And therefore a follow through entry model. This was my break of structure. If this is my break of structure, it means this high becomes the inducement high, right? So I just need price to, like I mentioned earlier with this diagram, some level in price internally where price can just come and wick through and then dance, okay? So price, grab liquidity, shifted structure, created an inducement high that price came back to, wick through nicely and then dropped, okay? But I still have my stop losses, as you can see, above this high, okay? Because if my logic is correct, then this high should be protected because it just took out liquidity from this area, right? So this was my entry for that. Okay, so this was my entry for that. Grab on liquidity, break of structure, my level of inducement, and then tapped. Now, why that happened, this week also created a grab on liquidity, right? Automatically, this week has grabbed liquidity, and then it has shifted structure. Like I said, I just need my next point of inducement to be tapped into, not other blocks. Okay, if I was waiting for other blocks, I wouldn't get into this trade. Okay, so my next point of liquidity to be tapped into, which is my inducement level, right? So I expected this inducement to be tapped into, and then it tapped into nicely and then dropped. Now, the reason why I was willing to hedge a buy from this point is because I also have grab on liquidity and what? Break of structure. Now, if I had gone down to a more lower time frame, I definitely would have seen a point of liquidity to be taken out inside of here. But since I cannot see that, I subjected to working with the other block. And if you see where I had my stop loss, it was still on this protected low, right? Because this guy already had grabbed liquidity from this area. That was why I was willing to work with it. That grabbed liquidity from this inducement level, right? So it grabbed liquidity from this inducement week and then broke structure. So it was valid to trade from. So I was willing to hedge a buy from this point. Now, instead of this hedge buy, there are some more setups I would have taken inside of here, but I was not willing to do that because I know follow through entries, there are like 2 other setups inside of here that I would have played with. But I'm not a bot, I'm a trader. Okay, so all of those things were irrelevant. All of those things were irrelevant. Now, this is the next point I was willing to buy from. Okay, let me straighten the screen so I don't keep scrolling like that. This is the next point I was willing to buy from. Why? The same setup, right? My grab on liquidity of this inducement week, okay? And then after price grab liquidity from there, this is a break of structure. Okay, I consider this as a break of structure. And then price came back. I was also targeting this next point of liquidity inducement level to be taken. Okay, but then if you look clearly, price did not wick through it. So I'd entered aggressively, the main price tapped it, and my stop loss was just below this. Why price did not wick through it was that price had already, this candle had already grabbed liquidity inducement from this other one. Right? I know it sounds very funny. It sounds very, because it's not something you're used to, and then it's not something you have been taught to follow, but then that's just what I do. I consider this as a grab on liquidity, okay? Because there was some sort of imbalance between this candle to this candle that this guy came to fill. Because it has done that, it has obviously grabbed internal liquidity. So this was a grab on liquidity, hence this guy was protected, okay? And this was a break of structure because this was the last up point before this move. So we had a shift here that I consider as break of structure, right? So once we had this play out, I was willing to engage from this point, okay, and then continue with the party, okay. And then the sell move. The target was this Asian high, like I said, the equal moves, the equal highs on Asia. Okay, that was the target. So once I have that targeted as my next point of inducement, once price taps into my inducement level, I am only looking to seeing a shift in structure. That's all I'm interested in seeing. So once I have price tapped into that level, I waited for this guy to shift structure, which did not shift. Okay, so price continued upwards again to give us some sort of manipulation, created a new high, and then continued to liquidate that high, making this the grab on liquidity, and then continued. Gave me a sort of reaction from this zone, okay, and then dropped, which prompted the notion that this zone was a valid demand level. It was because it was a valid demand level. That's why price had to give this rejection from this point, right? And then drop. So automatically, I am looking for my first point of interest, this area. Okay, this high, which should be my internal inducement level for price to now come to grab, and then I'll be willing to risk. So if we just check, I had my stop loss just above this. Okay, and then I complained about this on IG yesterday. My stuff refused to open for whatever reason. Okay, and then it left me. So next, I was concerned with this region, right? I was concerned with this region, and I re-entered aggressively because I considered this as a grab on liquidity. Okay, this was my grab on liquidity. This was my break of structure. So I expected price to just come in and move. So already in this trade, I was in this trade once price touched this level, and then I got stopped out. Okay, because for some reasons, I was not being too open with my stop loss. Okay, if I was, I would have engulfed this low here. Okay, and then I would have still been in the buy, but then that took me out, and that was that. Okay, so I became liquidity at that point, and then I was taken out. And then the second loss I had yesterday, this was a grab on liquidity. This was a break of structure, right? So this was my internal inducement point. The price was supposed to mitigate and drop. So I just had this level box, expecting to recover this from here. But this failed me. Okay, what actually happened was that the trend switched on me. Okay, the counter trend switched on me. I was hoping to take this counter trend far back to clear this lows and then mitigate this point of liquidity. That was my target before we begin to move, because this is a grab on liquidity here already, and this is a shift in structure. So all of these guys respected breaker blocks. Once they had played their parts, they were supposed to become liquidity automatically. That was why I did not see price coming back to use any of these, but then it actually came back to use this other block, and then that was that. So the moment we had this grab on liquidity and break of structure, I was expecting this as my inducement high to wick and then drop, but that failed, right? So broke above that high, automatically I should have been looking for my flip zones, but then I got angry because I had taken 2 losses in a row. That was poor emotional management or psychological management, and then I just left the trade. So what happened was the price did that and immediately came back to what? The flip zone. This was the last points of demand that sponsored this rally to the upside, right? This was the last point. So price immediately came back in, tapped into that, and then continued to rally. Now, after it had done that, this low is protected. Why? Because this is some sort of imbalance. If I should move out this price action, right? This is some sort of imbalance between this candle to this candle. So when this wick came down into this point, it had grabbed liquidity already from inside of these areas. Okay, so there was already a grab on liquidity, grab on internal liquidity. Okay, there was no need to look out for inducement points at this level. So grab on internal liquidity, and then it continued to break this structure to the upside, right? Which means that I need to now look for the next inducement level to be taken out, which was this guy for me. Okay, because if you look underneath it, there's some level of imbalance between this and this, right? So this was my inducement point after I grab on liquidity and a break of structure. So price came in nicely. I did not take this trade. I just watched all of that. Price came in nicely. Don't forget, this is protected. Price came in nicely and then did its thing with this and moved. Okay. And once he had moved, he came back again to, this was a new inducement level, right? Tapped on it nicely and then moved, gave us a final break of structure. I'm just trying to trace the story of the trades that I can see here, or setups I can see here on price. Okay, and then this was somewhat valid, but then I did not like the setup because of this whole gap. Okay, but then this is also a grab on liquidity and a break of structure. So this would have been the next inducement level. Okay, the fact is that you cannot just go about trying to take a trade off all the inducement levels that you find on your chart. All right, so this would have been a nice inducement level to buy from. But I think that was all of that. This was during the night time till price got into Asia. So look at what happened in Asia. I want to believe you all can still hear me clearly.
Yes,
Yes, boss.
Okay, so look at what happened in Asia. Price mitigated a level I had marked out on my 15 minutes time, on my 4-hour time frame rather. Okay, and then gave a nice break of structure. Okay, this is some sort of grab on liquidity, though it actually grabbed liquidity itself from the 4-hour area. It was the 4-hour grab on liquidity with this high, and then shifted this structure, right? Confirming the break of structure with these points. I was only, if I was trading at that point, I would only be interested, like I said, in this inducement level. Okay, that is my inducement week. Price should come in, induce it, grab liquidity from it, right? And then dump, right? And that was what happened there. Price came, tapped into it nicely, and then dumped. So for a follow through entry, I'll consider this as a break of structure. And then this here would have been my next area of inducement, right? These guys. Why those guys? Because this guy actually grabbed liquidity, internal liquidity from this area already, because there's some sort of inefficiency if you look clearly. Okay, so this high had grabbed liquidity and it has shifted structure. So the next inducement point had to be the weeks before the liquidity. My inducement points most times, the ones that are obviously visible, are the highs before an inefficiency. The highs before an inefficiency. That's some sort of cheats that I use. The highs before an inefficiency. Okay, so price came into that, mitigated and dropped. So at the break of structure, is a break of structure, right? If you wanted a follow through entry, right? Okay, we didn't have any of that. It was just mitigation, 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 mitigation that made all of this clear liquidity to be taken out. So I was telling my friend this morning that all of these highs will be cleared because the transfer of funds were just too much and too obvious. Transfer of funds, transfer of funds, transfer of funds. Okay, so all of those moves had to be cleared out this morning. Now, jumping to why I was willing to sell, okay, this morning at Frankfurt Open. Okay, so I had this high. This was more of a. Why did my screen stop sharing? Can everybody still hear me?
I
Yeah.
can still
Boss, we can
hear
hear you, but your screen is not sharing.
Okay. I think we're back on now, right?
Yeah, I can see your screen now.
Okay, so what happened here was some sort of response to flip zones. Okay, and then dropped. So this was another clear mitigation to mitigation to mitigation to with all of these mitigations here, like just like the ones happening externally outside here. We had the same thing happening internally inside here. Transfer of funds, transfer of funds, transfer of funds, transfer of funds, other block to other block, and all of those things. Okay, which was clear reasons that they all had to be cleared. So I had this zone marked out, this level marked out as my IDM level. Okay, as soon as price tapped it, okay, this is very, very small pipettes. So some people would not consider that, but that was what it was, right? Okay, so as soon as price tapped into that level and dropped, I was concerned with this high. I was concerned with this high. I wanted this high to be induced. So after this first price came and then tapped into the level and gave me this reaction, I just was concerned about with this high itself as the inducement high. Okay, I was concerned about this high itself as the inducement high. Okay, so price luckily got back to that point and did not waste time at all. It just tapped the line, right? And then continued doing its thing. Because for me, this was a break of structure. And then I will always have my stop loss above this high. So this is a 7.3 pip stop loss. Okay, and then this is a 4-hour trade. Okay, though I think I held for, yeah, I stayed full volume 4-hour because I was targeting this Asian low to be taken out. So I just took out everything on 4-hour. We're taking out this Asian low. And then we had a grab on liquidity from the Asian low, right? So this was my grab on liquidity from Asian low, and then a break of structure. I consider this as my structural point that was broken. The next thing I was concerned with seeing price come into this level to tap this guy, right? But when price tapped this guy, I think I went to use the bathroom or something, so I was not active when price tapped this guy. If not, I would have entered from this point, but I did not enter from this point. So I had a break of structure here. This is my break of structure, right? And then I needed to see the next area of inducement to be taken, which was this guy. Free unity will end it. Okay, I have just 10 minutes else for this. Okay, so just grab liquidity from this area, right? And then price came, grab liquidity and move. So this was a 14-hour. Okay, 14-hour. I went out to get food, so I just set stop loss at this high and let it run. Now, this was my next point of area to be taken out. Was it possible that price can drop down into this block? Yes, that's why I have this risk area, risk to reward to set down to this point, right? But then I'm more concerned about the last point of inducements to be liquidated. So let's say if I was waiting for order block here, I would have missed this trade. If I was waiting for refined entry here, I would have missed this trade. If I was still waiting for order block in those other trades, I would have missed all of them. So I was talking with Astios a while ago, and then he had mentioned a student, I think a student of his, or he did some kind of statistical stuff online. And 90% of people complain that order blocks do not work anymore. That's because they are not supposed to be trading off order blocks. Okay. You must always be willing and ready to transit, evolve with the system. Okay. Will this get to a day and then it begins to behave some other way? If it does, we will study it and then we'll follow it. That's why we're traders. Okay. So price grab on this liquidity and then move. Yes, Matt, you have a question. You can type it in the chat box. I'll attend to it shortly. Okay, grab liquidity from this area and then to the high heavens, right? Okay, so this was some other external liquidity that was supposed to be taken out from the 15 minutes perspective. The essence of all of this was to clear all of these highs. Okay, the essence of all of this was to clear all of these highs. So if you check, I had my last point set for this high. I had my last point set. How do we know the right liquidity that's meant to be taken? That's what I'm explaining now. Is it the right liquidity I'm explaining now? Okay, so if you still do not know the right liquidities, you still need to go back all of those videos on the group and watch them again. You'll just begin to get it. Okay, so this is the liquidity point I was expecting price to take as my Asian high liquidity, and also because of the overly transfer of funds that were inside of here. So price came to this and tapped nicely and then went back up. So the next thing I was looking out for was my what? Grab on liquidity, break of structure, which I actually found here. Very pretty nice one. Okay, and then my target was just above this high. Okay, so I had my line exactly on the high, but then I did not take the trade. I was not on seat when this happened. So this red trade is a missed trade. This would have been a very, very trade. Very, very perfect trade because my zero spend account would have cost this exactly from this high. And it would have been very pretty to watch, especially for the gram. Okay, so this was a grab on liquidity again, break of structure, coming to the area, the same thing you know. But then instead of looking at the other blocks, you're looking at the last level of inducement week before the inefficiency in most cases, okay? Last level of week before the inefficiency in most cases, okay? Last level of week, okay? So that's how to know the liquidity. Was it wrong? to have your order at the flip zone. It wasn't wrong, okay? It wasn't wrong. It was a nice perspective. But personally, if you were looking at flip zones, you want to be looking at the order block again. That's the thing. Because you'll be looking at this guy if you're looking at flip zones. Except you're working with your 3 minutes block. You cannot be looking at this. It still did not tap into the block, if you can see nicely. Okay, so I'm not looking for that. I'm just looking for my inducement week. Okay, so price did its thing and then dropped through aggressively. Okay, there was some sort of follow through models if I would have taken this trade. Okay, because this was a nice one, right? Grab on liquidity, shift in structure. My target would have been the last blah 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 for price to come up and week through it, right? So this would have been a nice re-entry and then continue with the play, as the case may have been. Okay, but then you cannot take all the moves you see on price. All right, what else? Okay, so this was the last sell I took this evening on 17R. And then on the video you watch, I actually marked out all of this. For those of you who saw the video, this was my next points to be induced. I expected this level to be weak through, okay, induced, and then price comes to give me a nice shift in market structure before I'll get to all of that, but let's just follow it closely. So this was a flip zone, okay, this was a flip zone. Let me pinch zoom and see if I can get why it was a flip zone. So let's trace through this to the rear view, right? Nice. So look at this guy. It was a grab on liquidity, break of structure. This was the order block everybody would have been expecting to buy from, right? Sorry, take it there. Nice. So this was the order block everybody would have been expecting to buy from. So price got there, gave some sort of reaction, right? And then dumped because that was some SMT trap. Okay. Obviously, I would have used this. I would have used this area to look for my shift in structure.
Boss,
Yeah.
I think your voice is faster than your screen. I don't know if it's from my phone.
It should be from it should be from your screen. It should be from your phone. Can you hear me now? Like you can see what I'm doing now, right?
It's not from
your
your
voice is
phone. It's not from his phone. I think it's general.
Wow, really?
I think it's from.
Okay.
I think it's the network.
I think
yeah.
network.
I think it's the network. Okay. Please, you can go back to mute your mic so I don't hear too many. I'm hearing too many sounds on the background. Okay, so now once this happened, right? Once this happened, I knew price had to come to this block specifically. Why did price have to come to this block? Because what I would have used as the inducement week was already inside of the zone. Okay. What I would have marked as my inducement week was already inside of the zone that was a failed area. So I can't use this. I needed something outside the zone. Please mute your mic. Who is that brother? Okay. I needed something outside of the zone. When you're trading flip zones, don't look for the reaction that is inside of the zone. Look for something outside of the zone. Okay. So when I saw this happen, I knew I could not trust these guys. So using this as an inducement week would just be a waste of time to engineer more liquidity. So I marked this out, actually explaining to a friend that too many guys will be willing. Mute your mics. Oh. I marked this out, explaining that too many other guys will be willing to sell from here. Okay, when I was talking this morning, okay, this afternoon, I think for Asia, too many other guys who trade similar thing I trade will be looking to sell from here. Okay, because I think experience also has its role to play. So if you had marked this area to sell from, and your stop loss would have been just on this week, so price would have just wicked you out and then continue to do its thing. Okay, like what happened to me in the other setup. So I learned my lesson, right? So I was focused on this particular guy, and then price just came to tap it nicely and dropped. Okay, so this was a 17-hour trade because my stop loss was just on the body of this candle. My stop loss was on the body of this candle. Okay, that's what I used. That's where the volume lies. Okay. That's where the volume lies inside of this. And then we had price break structure, okay, come back in to give us some sort of reaction. If I was supposed to take this, if I did know that this was going to buy from this point, okay, I already marked this for a buy long before then, from somewhere far back on the 15 minutes time frame. Okay, so I was not interested. That was why I had my stop loss my take profit exactly at this point. All right. Now, when price got to this area, we did not have a manipulation. So this was not a reason to go long yet. Okay, some people who had gone long already at this point will be taken out with the news and all of that. So I needed a nice manipulation. So whenever I see a low without a manipulation, no proper grab on liquidity from a key point you want to trade from, be careful. Okay, it could easily be taken out as inducement. So I waited for price to do the grab. So price came back to do the actual grab and then continued to do its thing till we were able to finally break internal structure. Okay, so this would have been my break of structure. Okay, so this is a nice flip zone again because we have this here as a grab on liquidity and then this low as a break of structure, right? So price was supposed to have respected, it gave us a reaction and then faltered. This was the last point that caused the rubbish, okay? And then price did its thing. Okay, so obviously